First up, as you probably know by now, Joe Biden did something unique among politicians this weekend. He actually listened to voters who overwhelmingly wanted him to drop out of the presidential race. He made the announcement on Sunday and simultaneously endorsed his VP, Kamala Harris, to take his place at the top of the Democratic Party ticket. Now, Glenn Greenwald called in from his much-deserved vacation last night to weigh in, and I echo many of his sentiments. I won't repeat his well-made points here, except to say the Democratic Party's hand-wringing about democracy under threat has been totally exposed by the fundamentally undemocratic suppression of the Democratic primary process. You probably remember this now famous clip of one-time Bernie press secretary turned Democratic Party booster, Simone Sanders, announcing there will be no primary.
I really think that the mealy-mouthed Democrats, as I like to call them, and some of my progressive friends who would like to live in a fantasy land, they need to come back to reality. Yeah. And the reality is this. The sitting president of the United States of America is a Democrat that would like to run for re-election, so much so that he has declared a re-election campaign. Right. In that case, the Democratic National Committee will not facilitate a primary process. There will be no debate stage for Bobby Kennedy, Marianne Williamson, or anyone else to
So we're going to have another Bobby Kennedy in an empty chair in the debate, right?
There will be no debate.
Yeah, no debate.
The Democratic National Committee administers the debates, and they're not going to set up a primary process for debates.
Of course, ironically, the integrity of the democratic process was the excuse she used to defend Joe Biden remaining in the race, even when back in 2022, a full 2 years ago, 3/4 of Democratic voters didn't want Biden to be the nominee. Take a listen.
So, Simone, if you're in that meeting right now, if you're a member of the Biden campaign and you're trying to convince these skeptical senators, hold your fire, what's your best argument?
Look, I think your best argument is there was a primary process, and you can have qualms about how open you think that process was, but there was a primary process, and Democratic voters cast their ballots for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And talking to and asking the senators in that room, have they heard from the delegates? Have they heard from the voters in their states? Because the senators, thanks to my former boss, former Senator Bernie Sanders, the senators and members of Congress, they no longer have a vote on the first ballot when it comes to convention. They're all super delegates. They are unpledged delegates, and unpledged delegates do not have a vote on the first ballot. And so I do think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the process here.
In fact, depending on how you slice it, Democrats haven't truly allowed their voters a real choice in a primary since maybe 2008. For 8 years now, progressives and independents who supported Bernie's 2016 and 2020 runs have complained that those primaries were rigged. We've been told we are merely delusional losers for years. So it's been a real trip to see Biden supporters openly admitting that Bernie would have won as they rallied to support Biden in what we now know were the final days of his campaign. Now, why were they suddenly admitting this? Well, as big donors increasingly called for Biden to drop out, Biden chose to dismiss them, framing their claims as mere elite priorities. In other words, elites wanted him to drop out, not normal voters. Now, of course, big donors are elites definitionally, but Biden's framing ignored two things. One, that particular elite opinion happened to have been shared by the majority of Democrats polled, and two, those were the same elites that rigged the 2020 primary to ensure that he, not Bernie, was the nominee. Listen to D.C. Congressman Adam Smith say exactly that.
I got to make one other point.
Yeah.
So the president talked today about how now it's all the elites who are trying to force him out.
Right.
Let's remember what happened in 2020. Okay, the president did not run a great primary campaign. He lost badly in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. He came out of Nevada, and Bernie Sanders looked like the presumptive nominee. And this exact same group of people,
the elites,
that the president is now deriding as elites. And by the way, they're not. They're Democrats, okay? They're party operatives, they're donors, they're volunteers, decided, and to all the Bernie supporters out there, I'm not judging this positively or negatively, they decided they didn't want Bernie Sanders to be the nominee. They decided that Joe Biden would be the better nominee. And credit, again, to the president. He decided that because he did 8 years as vice president. He did the years in the Senate. He had the record to be a strong president. And so they, through their support behind Joe Biden, and Pete Buttigieg and Elizabeth Warren and Mike Bloomberg and Amy Klobuchar, and I may be forgetting a few others, stepped aside
Right.
for the candidate who was better. This myth that somehow Joe Biden came in and rescued us, it has been a nationwide movement since Donald Trump was elected president. And in 2020, that nationwide movement said, Joe, you're the best guy, let's go. Right now, they don't think he is.
In the words of one of my all-time favorite, I think you should leave characters, he admitted it. But look, that's all old news at this point. Biden's out, and now the Democratic establishment is coalescing behind Kamala. All 24 blue state governors have endorsed her, as have Democratic Party heavy hitters Senator Chuck Schumer, former House Leader Nancy Pelosi, and current House Leader Hakeem Jeffries. If there was any hope that some semblance of democracy would creep back into the party via an open convention, and now seems dead on arrival, killed by the same party acolytes that killed Bernie's left populist insurgency. But here's the crazy thing I can't quite wrap my mind around. While establishment figures like Adam Smith and Joe Manchin were calling for Biden to drop out, so-called progressives like AOC and Bernie had Biden's back. Perhaps most embarrassing, on Thursday night, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez filmed a 50-minute Instagram live video where she made a series of truly incomprehensible arguments as to why Biden should be the nominee. Now, I just did a full episode on this on my own podcast, Bad Faith, so I won't belabor it here. But here's some of the highlights of AOC's very, very bad faith arguments. She argued that it was simply too late to replace Biden, saying that things would be different if the calls to drop out had happened a year ago. But of course, she omits that she endorsed Biden over a year ago, well before primary season, the primary we were never allowed to have, started, giving up any leverage she might have had in exchange for seemingly nothing. She went on to use identity politics to argue that Democrats shouldn't risk swapping out Biden because her community didn't have the privilege to lose an election. Super embarrassing, given that the same day, MSNBC covered a poll showing a 31% drop in support for Biden among, guess who, Black women from 2020 to 2024. Perhaps most embarrassing of all, though, AOC implied that the debate format was unfair to Biden because, get this, there was no audience. Trump, who, if nothing else, is an amazing showman, is widely understood to have benefited from having audiences at debate. They often cheer and clap for him, no matter how hard the moderators try to keep them quiet. He's a natural entertainer. If you'll indulge me, a classic Gemini. But before Biden dropped out, the enthusiasm gap between Biden and Trump was even larger than Trump's lead in Nevada. And yet AOC expected us to believe that had there been a crowd in the room, they would have rallied behind this.
In a 10-year period, we'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our health care system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare.
Truly embarrassing stuff. And for what? Days later, Biden dropped out anyway, taking her strategic credibility with him down the drain. Yet she still hasn't shown any humility. AOC lashed out at an ostensibly left-leaning lecturer at Harvard University's History of Science department after he tweeted, quote, "Cannot believe how badly Bernie and AOC effed this up. Never want to hear about their political instincts again." To which AOC replied, "Maybe you should think harder." Lashing out and insulting the intelligence of people in your base that disagree with you. You really are looking more and more like an establishment Democrat every day, AOC. I think the Hist of Psi professor had a good point. What did AOC and Bernie gain by defending Biden against the electorate? Ostensibly, progressives got Biden to adopt a range of sort of broadly popular but ultimately pretty incremental policies in the last few days of his campaign. But those were all contingent on things that were highly unlikely to happen, like Biden winning the House and Senate, getting rid of the filibuster, or, winning re-election at all. And after doing a 50-minute monologue in defense of Biden on Thursday night, here she is yesterday, all in on Kamala, again refusing to use her leverage to actually get something for the people she's supposed to represent.
I trust the president's judgment. I trust his decision making. I trusted his decision making when he was in this race, and when he has decided to not be in this race, I trust his judgment and decision making there as well. And I know that Vice President Harris is more than up to the task and ready to be president. As an elected official who is a prominent woman of color, I've seen a lot. And I know that the vice president has seen a lot. And so it's going to be very important that I think we brace ourselves for some of the unfair, misogynistic, and racial undertones, overtones, explicit attacks, and implicit attacks that she may be subject to. And it's important for us to keep our eyes open for what is fair, but also what is unfair. And she will be subject to a lot of unfair treatment.
Oof. Please excuse the eye roll. Look, there's at least one progressive woman of color who isn't bending the proverbial knee. Unlike AOC and progressive caucus leader Pramila Jayapal, who also offered a premature endorsement of Kamala Harris, Rashida Tlaib is using this moment as a real outsider, anti-establishment figure should, to win something for her constituents. She issued a statement saying, quote, "I welcome the opportunity to engage Vice President Harris as my team and I work to inspire our Democratic base in the 12th Congressional District. They want to see a permanent ceasefire and an end to the funding of genocide in Gaza." She went on to say, quote, "I support a transparent democratic process at an open convention next month and hope there is a fair vote on the resolution at the DNC that calls for an arms embargo to stop the Israeli government's war crimes." Given that Tlaib stands nearly alone in that request, I'm not holding my breath for an open convention, but what an example in contrast she at least presents. Now, it certainly feels like most Democrats, including a lot more leftists than I'd like to admit, are all in on Kamala. They're coconut pilled, as the kids say. Look, emotionally, I get it. What used to feel like cringe, memeable content, the famous "you didn't just fall out of a coconut tree" line, now feels kind of light and maybe even fresh after weeks of holding our collective breaths every time Biden paused in the middle of a speech while squinting at a teleprompter. Popular singer Charlie XCX tweeted out, "Kamala is Brat," Brat being the name of her chart-topping album, and launching a fleet of op-eds about Kamala's potential cultural impact and the potential for saving Democrats from Biden's dismal youth poll numbers. Now, I'm about 5 or 10 years too old to be able to help you understand what Brat is actually, but here's what I can tell you. Even some on the left who railed against Kamala back in 2020 are describing themselves as coconut pilled. But here is why they absolutely shouldn't. First of all, I know memories are short, but Biden's poll numbers didn't just start to dip after his disastrous debate with Donald Trump. Long before I was censored by The Hill, we were covering damning swing state polls that made Biden's path to 270 look nearly impossible. The debate was merely the nail in the coffin. And one of the huge factors that drove Biden's low polls, particularly among youth voters and in swing states like Michigan, where America's largest Muslim population lives, is the war in Gaza. And guess what? Things have not gotten better in Gaza over the last weeks. Though school is out for summer and headlines about police arresting gray-haired professors and billionaire-backed Zionists funding violent mobs who bloodied student journalists are gone for now, any voter with internet access is still seeing a nonstop horror show on the ground in Palestine. 80% of Gaza is under evacuation orders or designated no-go zones, and with nowhere to go, Palestinians are being killed by the dozens daily. 70 were killed yesterday by Israeli tank salvos, even after humanitarian aid workers, including an American, were killed in the now infamous strikes on Jose Andres Central Food Kitchen caravan workers. More humanitarian aid workers who also coordinated in advance with the Israeli government, were struck in recent days. 2 clearly marked UNICEF vehicles were hit with live ammunition today as they were en route to reunite 5 children, including a baby, with their father. The Lancet Medical Journal now estimates that the death toll in Gaza may exceed 186,000 people. American surgeon Mark Perlmutter told CBS on Sunday that he's witnessed a stunning number of toddlers with headshot wounds. He told them he reviewed CT scans to confirm what he saw because he, quote, didn't believe this many children could be admitted to a single hospital with gunshot wounds to the head. As the doctor put it, no toddler gets shot twice by mistake by the world's best snipers. It's not just students and Arab voters who are upset. As of March, a majority of Americans, 50% to 36%, disapproved of the Israeli military's actions in Gaza. And just today, 7 major labor unions, including the UAW and SEIU, called on Biden to halt all military aid to Israel. Now, Democrats see Kamala as a relief valve of sorts, a way to create distance between Biden's unpopularity on this issue and the Democratic Party itself. But too many people are presuming a Kamala Harris administration represents a real policy shift from the Biden administration. As journalist Jeremy Scahill recently wrote at his new Dropsite news platform, quote, the truth is that, like most Democrats, Harris has supported Biden's policies, even if she has raised tactical objections or expressed moral unease with the horrifying death toll. Soon after being elected to the Senate in 2016, Harris earned a reputation as an ardent defender of Israel. She spoke 2 years in a row at AIPAC conferences and co-sponsored legislation aimed at undermining a UN resolution condemning Israel's illegal annexation of Palestinian land. One of her first international trips as a senator was to Israel, where she met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in 2017. At an AIPAC conference that year, she said, quote, I support the United States' commitment to provide Israel with $38 billion in military assistance over the next decade. I believe the bonds between the United States and Israel are unbreakable, and we can never let anyone drive a wedge between us. As long as I'm a United States senator, I will do everything in my power to ensure broad and bipartisan support for Israel's security and right to self-defense. As long as she's a United States senator, and perhaps also as president of the United States of America. Now, despite this, the public has largely taken for granted that Kamala's rhetorical softness on this issue, at least as compared to Biden's posture, means a real policy shift. Netanyahu arrived in the United States this week for a much-anticipated address to Congress, and some media sources interpreted the vice president's planned absence from this address as evidence that she was breaking from Biden's bear hug Bibi strategy. However, as leading Israeli paper Haaretz reported, quote, Harris will be meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu this week at the White House. White House Jewish liaison Shelley Greenspan was quoted in Haaretz as saying that Harris, quote, will reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the security of the state of Israel. Kamala being not Biden does not solve the Democrats' Gaza problem, no matter how memeable she is. She could solve it if pushed, but while AOC has boldly tweeted that she will not be watching war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu address the joint session of Congress, she, of course, endorsed Biden, who considered Bibi a close personal friend, is endorsing Kamala before securing any commitments that she'll continue his policies, and it's unlikely that we'll see any change.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.